Hello there, I'm Aidan, also known as Penguin Node. And yes, this is what I look like. This video was supposed to be released in February, but things got in the way and this video took longer to edit than I wanted to. So instead, I decided to postpone it and let my friend Spencer edit it on DaVinci Resolve. So let me know what you think after this video. With that being said, this is the ownership history of the St. Louis Blues. Play the intro. To clarify, I'm starting from ownership at the franchise's beginning to today. That means if the team moved, their previous owners in previous locations would be on here also. But that never happened, so it doesn't apply here. I will also give a brief summary of the team's performance during each ownership. Let's begin. When the Blues were founded on February 9th, 1966, along with the other 5 expansion teams, they were a conditional franchise. Even though Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles, Oakland, and Minnesota had owners, St. Louis didn't. St. Louis was founded by Arthur Wirtz, owner of the Blackhawks, and James Norris, owner of the Red Wings. The two owned the St. Louis Arena and had no use for it, besides the Blackhawks minor league team. Wirtz lobbied for an expansion team in St. Louis, not only as another rival to the Hawks, but as a way to get rid of the arena. There were 2 big groups that were interested. Biggie Garagnani, a St. Louis Italian restaurant owner, and a group of investors that included Cardinals legend Stan Musial. However, he never received an application. The other group, Sidney Solomon Jr. and Sid Solomon III, 2 insurance executives in St. Louis County, gave Wirtz in the NHL the money they were looking for. $2 million for the expansion fee and $4 million for the St. Louis Arena. A deal was done and the Solomons had their team. When deciding on a name for their new team, well, I'll just let Sid III answer that for you.
We were talking and Dad said, well, look, we can't find a name. I just think the greatest name in the world is we'll just call them the St. Louis Blues. And geez, we all lit up. You know, we were stunned. Was really a great name. And of course, Jim Cullen comes up. He says, well, if we do this, the Jim Hendy estate will probably say we were open to a lawsuit. And Dad said, that's more reason. Now we're definitely going to call them the St. Louis Blues.
You heard it. Sidney Jr. just came up with the name St. Louis Blues after the song by W.C. Handy. And after the idea that a lawsuit could happen, Sidney Jr. believed potential lawsuits could give the team national attention. However, when the name was announced, most fans weren't on board with it. Just listen to these testimonials.
I like the hockey team, but the new name, it just don't go.
Why not?
Well, Blues is kind of a depressed state, and the Braves are far from being depressed.
It won't be the Braves, it'll be a new NFL team.
Right.
An NHL team, rather.
It still should be the Braves.
I think they ought to retain the name of the Braves.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the name St. Louis Blues for a hockey team?
I don't like it either. I think it should be the Braves also.
Oh, I think the name is terrible. I don't know what would be a good name. Maybe the Breads would be better, but I just don't like the new name. No flash, color, nothing about it.
Well, I think it's kind of depressing. It should be something exciting and fast. Blues sounds kind of sad and depressed. Not like a losing team. We got a winning team.
I don't like it.
Why not?
Well, a blue is a passive color, and I don't care. I like the red for the Redbirds and all that. You're sure this doesn't cost nothing that you're asking me?
No, it's not costing a cent.
Well, I tell you, I think I don't like blue. I think red's a better color. The uniforms would look better, and why don't they give something dynamic to it? See, maybe the St. Louis Mules. That's a nice name.
They wanted the team to be called the Braves after the aforementioned minor league team that belonged to the Blackhawks. But they've been the Blues since, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The Blues, although they finished their first season at a pretty meh 27-31-16, made the playoffs and advanced to the Stanley Cup Finals. St. Louis made the finals in their first 3 years of existence, but were swept in all 3 appearances, twice to Montreal and once to Boston. Despite this, fans embraced the Blues and the Blues embraced St. Louis, and the Solomons were the best owners they could have gotten. Players on the Blues were treated kindly and given higher salaries compared to other teams. but other teams didn't like what the Solomons were doing. Maple Leafs head coach and GM Punch Imlach said, "I think the Solomons are on very thin ice with that kind of stuff. From a management point of view, it's bad. It puts every other team in the league in an impossible competitive position. The Solomons weren't going to take orders from anyone else. I think Mr. Imlach owes us an apology. We're not trying to tell or show anyone else how to run their clubs. We paid $2 million for this franchise, and we're entitled to run it the way we please." So everything seems fine. Well, not entirely. In 1972, an insurance firm that partnered with the Solomons company terminated its agreement. Not to mention, the Solomons had put more money into the arena to refurbish it. While the Blackhawks and Red Wings owned the arena, neither of them maintained it, leaving the place in bad condition when the Solomons bought the arena. The Solomons put more money into the arena, but it turned out to be more than they could chew. Unpaid taxes, a laundry list of creditors, Sid III changing coaches and general managers left and right. Oh, let's throw in a threat to move the Blues out of St. Louis, because why not? And the Blues were in trouble. Attendance sank hard and employees were laid off to allow the Solomons to meet payroll. Not to mention, the Solomons were suffering health-wise. Sid Jr. suffered 2 heart attacks, and Sid III, while also fighting cancer, suffered from Hodgkin's disease. The Solomons hired Emile the Cat Francis to operate the team and find a new owner while the Solomons were recovering. He'd nearly found one in Fred Coomer, the CEO of a hospital and medical construction company, but Coomer turned it down due to the amount of debt the Blues were saddled with. Then Francis found the saver, Ralston Purina. Yes, that Purina, the pet food company. In the press conference, Chairman R. Hal Dean stated that it was civic duty to buy the Blues and keep the team in St. Louis. There's a catch, however. This was temporary until a suitable owner could buy the Blues. The Blues would bounce back on the ice and start a postseason streak that would last 25 seasons. But then, in 1981, Dean retired. The new chairman, William Stritz, wasn't interested in the Blues and saw them as something that drained Purina of money. Stritz put the Blues up for sale. One group that was interested was the St. Louis beer giant Anheuser-Busch, but they refused because, I don't know. Then in 1983, Purina accepted an offer from a group from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, who had plans to move the Blues to Saskatoon. I made a video about this about a year ago, so I won't go into detail, but long story short, the deal was rejected with a 15-3 vote, with 3 abstaining. Only Calgary, Montreal, and Winnipeg voted in favor. The representatives for Chicago, Minnesota, and Vancouver didn't show up to the meeting, most likely making them the 3 who abstained. Either way, the move fell through and the Blues were staying in St. Louis. Well, it wasn't without stress. There were lawsuits, the Blues didn't show up to the draft, and after the NHL took the franchise away from Purina, they tried to find a buyer but would contract the team if they couldn't find someone by a certain deadline. But fortunately, they found someone. Who was that person? Harry Ornest. Harry Ornest made his fortune by importing vending machines to Canada and selling soda fountains to movie theaters. Ornest always wanted to own a professional sports team. The Blues gave him that opportunity. In January, Ornest read newspapers that detailed the Blues being sold to Saskatoon. Ornest monitored the situation. Then, when the Blues were on death's door, Ornest and a group of local investors came to save the day and buy the Blues, keeping them in St. Louis. The most notable moment a lot of Blues fans remember from the Ornest era, besides the addition of red and the big Blues word marked to the Blues jerseys, was the Monday Night Miracle. After falling down 5-2, the Blues rallied to tie the game, force overtime, and win in overtime to force Game 7 against the Calgary Flames. Don't think Ornest was all good with no flaws. He had a dark side. He ran the Blues on the cheap, made some close decisions, and ruffled the feathers of the other owners in the league. According to Jim DelVillano, an executive for the Red Wings at the time, during league meetings, Ornest would rile up the other owners and even league president John Ziegler. He once said to an owner, "Why are you paying all this money to this coach? Why do you pay the players all that money?" He once said to Ziegler, "Why do you have such a big staff? I operate the St. Louis Blues with 5 people. Why do you have 25 people running the league?" Besides making enemies with other owners, Ornest was cheap. He traded fan favorites Mike Liut and Joe Mull instead of paying them. Ornest also got into a scuffle with St. Louis Mayor Vincent Schaemel. After a fight over taxes and property, Ornest agreed to sell the arena to the city of St. Louis and the Blues to local businessman Michael Shanahan. Michael Shanahan made his fortune in air conditioning and heating. He was asked by Mayor Shamel if he was interested in buying the Blues. Shanahan struck a deal with Ornest in December of 1986. The Blues were still a constant playoff contender under Shanahan. Only problem was they never made it past the first or second round, usually falling to the Blackhawks or North Stars. This is where things got confusing. In 1991, Shanahan sold his ownership stake to a group of investors under the name of Kiel Center Partners. Shanahan stayed as chairman until 1995, when he was replaced by Jerry Ritter. Now, if the name Kiel Center sounds familiar, that's because the group helped construct a new arena in downtown St. Louis where the old Kiel Auditorium was. This new building was Kiel Center. The St. Louis arena, while historic, was run down and the Blues needed a new arena. Before that, Kiel Center Partners had one way to help get the Blues over the hump. Throw money at everything. Buy a championship. There wasn't a salary cap at the time, so throw money at anyone and everything. The Blues of the 90s had a promising core. Brett Hull, Brendan Shanahan, Craig Janney, Jeff Brown, Steve Duchesne, Curtis Joseph, and more. Then came 1994. The Blues finished with a decent record, but in the playoffs it all fell apart in a 4-game sweep by the Dallas Stars. Changes were needed, and Kiel Center Partners knew who could do it. Mike Keenan, the boisterous, flamboyant head coach of the New York Rangers. Keenan led the Rangers to their first Stanley Cup in more than half a century in 1994. Despite this, Keenan had been feuding throughout the season with GM Neil Smith, and Keenan was looking for a way out. He and his agent had made contact with other teams. Then, a month after the Cup win, Keenan quit, claiming that the Rangers were in breach of contract. Keenan signed with the Blues, becoming head coach and GM. Along with new head coach and GM Mike Keenan, the Blues revealed these new uniforms with a heavy use of red. So how did the Keenan era begin? Well, the Blues had another solid regular season in 1995, but lost in 7 games to the Canucks. Keenan decided that the current core wasn't going to get them over the top. What they needed was a blend of 80s Oilers and early 90s Blackhawks players, the same formula that won in New York in 94. But this required some big changes. Brendan Shanahan, he gone. Traded to the Whalers for this young defenseman named Chris Pronger. Fans were pissed about this trade, even as Pronger blossomed into a quality two-way defenseman. It was later revealed that Shanahan, the player, was traded because he was having an affair with Craig Janney's wife. But there was more. Out went Doug Litster, Curtis Joseph, Steve Duchesne, Bill Holder, Todd Ellick, and prospect Mike Greer. In came Chris Pronger, Grant Fuhr, Brian Noonan, Dale Hawerchuk, and Shane Corson. Blues fans were not happy about this. Instead of maybe 1 or 2 minor changes, Keenan put the team under the knife and doctored the team into a Frankenstein-like mess. Opening night was missing the excitement that it usually had. The team itself floated around 500 the entire year. It's obviously Brett Hull's fault, so Keenan stripped him of the captaincy. 8 games into the season. Even with the blockbuster trade for Wayne Gretzky, the Blues weren't able to become the juggernaut Keenan thought they would be. But they were able to make the playoffs with a very iffy 32, 34, and 16 record. Thank the Western Conference for being weak as hell. The Blues were able to make it past the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round, but there was one problem. Grant Fuhr, the goalie who had started all but 3 games in the regular season, tore his ACL when Toronto's Nick Kypreos ran into him in Game 2, knocking him out for the rest of the playoffs. Despite that, backup goalie John Casey came out of nowhere and picked up the slack. Then came the second round and the biggest challenge yet, the Red Wings. Detroit took both games at home. St. Louis would even the series with wins at home as well. Then the Blues took a 3-2 series lead with a close 3-2 win. This was their chance to knock off the Wings. Or they could lose in Game 6 to go back to Detroit for Game 7. It remained scoreless for 3 periods until a Gretzky turnover gave the puck to Steve Yzerman, who fired a slap shot that Casey missed and won the series for the Red Wings. The season was over. The offseason saw one big decision. Keep Keenan, the coach and GM who mangled the roster and turned it into a mess, or get rid of Keenan and get Gretzky to stay. The Blues chose Keenan, causing Wayne Gretzky to walk in free agency. The next season started out poorly. 3,000 seats were empty for the home opener. Fans were tuning out and the atmosphere at Kiel Center was dead. Kiel Center partners had no choice but to clean house. In December, Mike Keenan and President Jack Quinn were fired. To fix the Blues, they brought in former Cardinals and Pirates CEO Mark Sawyer. Along with Sawyer was the new senior vice president of marketing, Jim Woodcock. Sawyer and Woodcock hatched a plan to get the fans back. Kiel Center and the team would get a true blue makeover to bring the team back to a classic look. Gone were the magenta seats, the pre-game laser show, and the infamous clown suits. In came blue seats, new uniforms, and a classic blue note. Despite this, financial issues were mounting. Again. Kiel Center partners were starting to feel the financial pain and were looking at selling the team. In 1999, they found a buyer. Bill and Nancy Laurie. Before I start, let's learn a little bit about the Lauries. Bill Laurie is married to Nancy Walton, heiress to the Walmart fortune. Yes, that means Bill Laurie and Stan Kroenke are in-laws. Another example came in 2004, when the Lauries donated to help fund the construction of a new arena at Mizzou and named it Page Sports Arena, after their company Page Sports and Entertainment, which was named after their kid, Paige Laurie, who attended USC, not Mizzou, and cheated her way through college. The name was dropped only a few weeks later, and the place is now called Mizzou Arena. So that's what kind of person Bill Laurie is. At first, it didn't seem like anything bad would happen under the Lauries. The Blues won the President's Trophy in 2000 and made the conference finals in 2001. They had two future Hall of Famers on defense in Chris Pronger and Al McInnes, and a solid core that recovered from Mike Keenan's reign of terror. They should be set up for years of greatness, right? Right? Well, Bill Laurie wasn't entirely interested in hockey. His mindset was the hardwood, in particular an NBA team in St. Louis. He tried to move an NBA team to St. Louis no matter what. The St. Louis Grizzlies, the St. Louis Nuggets, the St. Louis Hornets, the return of the St. Louis Hawks. All attempts to bring an NBA team to St. Louis failed. As Laurie tried and failed to get an NBA team to St. Louis, the Blues continued to flounder in the playoffs. A loss in the conference finals turned into another second-round elimination to the goddamn Red Wings, to blowing a 3-1 series lead in the first round to the Canucks, to a first-round exit at the hands of the Sharks. And because Bill Laurie couldn't get his precious NBA team, he pouted and wanted nothing to do with the Blues. If he couldn't get an NBA team in St. Louis, he would power level his way out, even if it came at the cost of the Blues. He wanted to sell a team as soon as he could. Star players with any value, that'll make the selling price too expensive. Not to mention the salary cap, which put a squeeze in the Blues' previous free spending ways. The biggest casualty? Chris Pronger, traded to the Edmonton Oilers for Eric Brewer, a defenseman with a funny last name, and an EA Sports generated player. The 2005-06 Blues were the worst team in franchise history. The team crashed and fell out of the gate. In the midst of the team immolating, Laurie found a buyer, Dave Checketts. Dave Checketts was originally a consultant at a Boston firm. Then in 1983, as a 28-year-old, Checketts became the president and GM of the NBA's Utah Jazz. He made his way up to the top as the president and CEO of Madison Square Garden in New York. In 2001, he resigned and started SCP Worldwide. In 2005, he founded Real Salt Lake. He's also a Mormon. He felt like mentioning that. Then in March of 2006, he bought the St. Louis Blues. He brought in an investment group called Towerbrook Partners, which owned 70%, and local beer man Tom Stillman, who owned 10%. While Checketts, who owned 20%, was the man in charge of this operation. Checketts had a tough task ahead of him. Fans were turned away by the Lauries, and Checketts had to reel them back in to watch a team that was entering a real rebuild for the first time in franchise history. He didn't start on the right foot due to elements in and out of its control. Checketts raised ticket prices, which he later said the league forced him to. The campaign for the 2006-07 season, titled Join the Blue Revolution, was less of a revolution and more of a spectacle of cringe, and being forced to sell the rights to concession stands to cover a balloon payment on the loan he used to buy the team. Besides money issues, the team was subpar for the first few years, finishing nowhere near a playoff spot. 2008-09 started out the same way, but then something different happened. In January of 2009, the Blues were 15th in the West. but then they made a mad dash and sprinted into a playoff spot with a furious second half. The rebuild had brought the fruits of a team that was slowly transitioning to becoming a playoff contender. Until the Blues were swept in the first round by the Canucks. It wasn't as bad as it seemed. The games were all close, but St. Louis was no match for Vancouver. At least the future was bright. Or was it? The Blues slumped in the next 2 seasons, missing the playoffs in both. Meanwhile, Tower Brook Partners won it out. Checketts was having money problems and needed a solution. In March of 2011, Checketts put the Blues up for sale. 6 months later, a buyer surfaced that would buy the team. Max Chambers. Who's Max Chambers? He is the businessman from Calgary who offered Checketts $167 million in cash. He assembled an ownership group that included Hall of Famer Brian Trottier. According to Chambers, Trottier wanted to become an owner of the Blues. Yet Checketts rejected the offer. Why? I don't know. Despite financial and ownership troubles, the 2011-12 Blues started sluggish. Then Davis Payne was fired and replaced by Ken Hitchcock, who put the spark into the team. The Blues, with their best regular season in over a decade, made it back to the playoffs with the 3rd best record in the league. They even beat the Sharks to win a playoff series for the first time in 10 years. They would get swept by the Kings in the next round, but it showed that the rebuild was officially over. Better days were ahead, and the Blues had something that they were missing: stable ownership. Tom Stillman had been a minority owner since 2006. He made his fortune in the beer industry with his company, Summit Distributing, which sells Miller and Coors products. Stillman and a collective of local investors, which includes Carolyn Kindle, the owner of St. Louis City SC. Stillman and his group took the Blues to new heights. This was around the time I really got into hockey. I remember the first game that really sold me. December 9th, 2013. The Blues were in Columbus to take on the Blue Jackets. Despite scoring the first goal, they fell down in the first period 3-1. But the Blues rallied to tie the game and win in overtime. There was also the 2016 playoffs where the Blues dethroned the Blackhawks in Game 7 and obliterated the Stars in a Game 7. The Blues even hosted their first Winter Classic in 2017, bashing the Blackhawks 4-1 at Busch Stadium. But I know what you are all here for. The Blues made big moves in the 2018 offseason. I remember opening night 2018. I should know, young me got to meet Tom Stillman. He said to be patient. I didn't know it at the time. January 2019, the Blues were a mess. Last place in the league, the team was fighting each other at practice, and a blow-up to the core seemed imminent. Yet something happened. With the help of a song at a Philadelphia bar, which the Blues should bring back as their win song, new head coach Craig Berube, and a rookie goalie from the minors named Jordan Bennington, the Blues emerged from the doldrums with an outstanding second half, similar to the miracle run of 2009. The Blues won 11 games in a row. Once again, I was at the game where they broke the record. The Blues carried this momentum to the playoffs where they did what hadn't been done before. They won the Stanley Cup, their first in franchise history. Stillman's goals of organizational stability and winning a Stanley Cup were accomplished. In 2019, following the Cup win, Sport Capital Holdings, a minority ownership from out of town, sold its share to Stillman and Company, making the ownership group 100% local. Stillman has been the best owner out of all the owners on this list. He does the right things. He doesn't meddle in day-to-day operations, he gives back to the community, and he is 100% committed to St. Louis. Now if you're asking if this current Blues core could win another cup, I'm not sure. I am also terrible with predictions and assumptions, so take my guess with a grain of salt. At the very least, Blues have competent ownership and management. As we end this video, I've wondered something. What would have happened if Checketts sold his stake to Max Chambers and Brian Trottier? Would Tom Stillman still be part of the ownership? Would the Blues still have won the Stanley Cup in 2019? Would they have won more with Chambers? How would the Blues be run today? It's a big what if that I want all Blues fans to think about. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Let me know in the comments or the suggestion box what team ownership history I should do next. Be sure to check out my hockey podcast, Maple Blues, with Charlie ND, where we talk about hockey and our favorite teams. Episodes are available on Spotify and our respective channels. Also let me know if I should do more content with my face or not. I'll see you in the next video.